The blistering summer sun beat down on Porterville, California, as Zara Reynolds stared in horror at the words her father had just spoken. "You will marry Mr. Thornton next Sunday, and that's final." His voice rang with the finality of a judge's gavel, crushing her dreams like autumn leaves underfoot. Her future, once bright with possibilities, now seemed as barren as the dusty streets outside their window on this merciless day in July 1878. "Father, please," Zara pleaded, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles whitened. "I've never even spoken more than 10 words to the man. How can you expect me to spend the rest of my life with him?" Harrison Reynolds, once a gentle man whose eyes had sparkled with kindness, now looked at his 20-year-old daughter with the cold stare of a businessman finalizing a transaction. The drought had taken its toll on their once prosperous ranch, and Thornton's wealth promised salvation. "Mr. Thornton controls the water rights to the North Valley. Without this marriage, our ranch will be dust by Christmas." He softened his voice, placing a weathered hand on Zara's shoulder. "Sometimes, girl, love is a luxury we cannot afford." Zara brushed away the tears threatening to spill down her cheeks. "And what of mother? Did she not teach you that a life without love is hardly worth living?" The mention of her mother, gone these past 5 years, seemed to pierce through her father's resolve, but only for a moment. "That's enough," he said, turning away. "The arrangements are made. Thornton is 45 and established. He'll provide for you better than any young buck with stars in his eyes." Zara fled to her room, the only sanctuary she had left in a world closing in around her. From her window, she could see the vast expanse of the valley. The rolling hills that had once been green now faded to tawny gold under the relentless California sun. Beyond those hills lay places she'd only read about in her cherished books, places where women might have choices beyond those made for them by desperate fathers and opportunistic suitors. The next morning dawned bright and unforgiving. Zara had barely slept, her mind churning with desperate plans of escape, each one more impossible than the last. She dressed mechanically, her fingers trembling as she buttoned her simple blue cotton dress. Today, she would accompany her father into town for supplies, and according to his decree, she would also be formally introduced to Albert Thornton as his future bride. Porterville's Main Street bustled with the usual activity of a Saturday morning. Farmers and ranchers mingled with townspeople, exchanging news and goods. The mercantile store, with its wide porch and welcoming facade, stood at the heart of the town, a gathering place for all who called this valley home. As their wagon pulled up before the store, Zara noticed a stranger tying his horse to the hitching post. He stood tall, his broad shoulders encased in a dusty leather vest, a worn hat pulled low over his eyes. There was something about his confident stance that caught her attention, a freedom in his movements that spoke of a life unfettered by others' expectations. "Come along, Zara," her father said, breaking her reverie. "Thornton will meet us inside." The mercantile's interior was cool and dim after the bright sunshine outside. Glass jars of candy and preserves lined the shelves, while bolts of fabric and tools filled the walls. The familiar scent of coffee and leather should have been comforting, but today it only heightened Zara's sense of impending doom. Albert Thornton stood near the counter, engaged in conversation with the storekeeper. Upon seeing Harrison Reynolds, he straightened his expensive waistcoat and approached with an outstretched hand. "Harrison, good to see you," he said, his voice as dry as the creek beds in August. His gaze slid from her father to Zara, assessing her as one might a prize heifer at auction. "And this must be your lovely daughter. The descriptions hardly do you justice, Miss Reynolds." Zara fought the urge to recoil as he took her hand, pressing his lips to her skin in a kiss that lingered too long. His mustache, waxed to stiff points, scratched against her flesh. "Mr. Thornton," she acknowledged with a stiff nod, withdrawing her hand as quickly as politeness would allow. "Please call me Albert. After all, we are to be family very soon." His smile didn't reach his eyes, which remained calculating and cold. "Mr. Thornton has invited us to dine at the hotel this evening," her father announced. "He wishes to discuss the arrangements." "How thoughtful," Zara managed, though her throat felt tight with unshed tears. "If you'll excuse me, I need to select some thread." It was a flimsy excuse, but she couldn't bear another moment under Thornton's appraising stare. She retreated to a far corner of the store, pretending to examine spools of thread while blinking back tears. The bell above the door jingled, and she glanced up to see the stranger from outside enter the store. In the filtered light, she could see his features clearly, a strong jaw dusted with stubble, keen eyes the color of a summer storm, and sun-bronzed skin that spoke of days spent in the open air. He nodded politely to the storekeeper and began examining the selection of ammunition on a nearby shelf. Zara found herself watching him, envying his evident freedom. Their eyes met briefly across the store, and she quickly looked away, embarrassed to be caught staring. When she looked up again, she noticed Thornton observing their exchange with narrowed eyes. He said something to her father, then approached her with a proprietary air that made her skin crawl. "Your father tells me you're quite accomplished with watercolors," Thornton said, standing too close. "Perhaps you'll paint the view from my ranch house. It's quite spectacular, overlooking the entire valley." "I prefer to paint wildflowers, Mr. Thornton," she replied, moving subtly away. "They represent freedom and natural beauty." His smile tightened. "A woman's fanciful pursuits are charming, of course, but you'll find your time better spent managing my household. I run an efficient operation, Miss Reynolds, and expect the same from my wife." "I was not aware that marriage transformed a woman into an employee," Zara said before she could stop herself. Thornton's expression darkened. "Spirited, aren't you? Your father didn't mention that." He lowered his voice, gripping her elbow with surprising strength. "That will change after the wedding. I don't tolerate defiance in my business affairs, and I certainly won't in my marriage." Zara felt a chill despite the warm day. This was the man she was expected to obey for the rest of her life, a man who viewed her as property to be acquired and controlled. "Is everything all right here?" The deep voice came from beside them. The stranger stood there, his stance relaxed, but somehow protective. Up close, Zara could see that he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps in his late 20s. "This is a private conversation," Thornton said dismissively. The stranger didn't move. "The lady seems uncomfortable." "The lady is my fiancée, and our affairs are none of your concern, Cowboy." Thornton practically spat the last word. "I don't recall agreeing to be your fiancé," Zara said, her voice barely above a whisper. The stranger's eyes flickered to her face, noting her distress. "Seems to me a man ought to be sure of a lady's feelings before claiming her as his own." Her father appeared beside them, his expression thunderous. "What's happening here?" "Nothing at all, Harrison," Thornton said smoothly. "Just a misunderstanding with this gentleman." "He was manhandling your daughter, sir," the stranger said directly. "Where I come from, that's not how you treat a lady you claim to respect." Harrison frowned. "And who might you be to involve yourself in our family matters?" "The name's Knox Sutton," the stranger said, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. "Just passing through on my way to San Francisco." "Well, Mr. Sutton, I suggest you continue on your way and leave Porterville's business to its residents." Harrison's tone was clipped. Knox replaced his hat slowly, his eyes never leaving Zara's. A woman's heart isn't a business transaction, Mr. Reynolds. Your daughter deserves to choose her own path." The store had gone silent, other customers watching the confrontation with undisguised interest. Zara felt a rush of gratitude toward this stranger, this Knox Sutton, who had voiced the very thoughts she'd been too frightened to express. "How dare you?" Thornton sputtered. "I'll have you run out of town for this impertinence." Knox seemed unimpressed by the threat. "Been run out of better towns than this, Mr. Thornton." He turned to Zara. "Madam, if you're being forced into something against your will, you should know there are always choices." "That's enough," Harrison snapped, taking Zara's arm. "We're leaving. Come along, Zara." As her father pulled her toward the door, Zara glanced back at Knox Sutton. His expression was troubled, but he gave her a small nod that somehow felt like a promise. Outside, the heat enveloped them immediately. Her father's grip on her arm was painfully tight as he marched her toward their wagon. "You've embarrassed me in front of the entire town," he hissed. "What were you thinking, speaking to Thornton that way, and encouraging that drifter to interfere?" "I didn't encourage anything," Zara protested. "But he was right, Father. You can't just sell me like one of our cattle." The slap came before she could react, his hand connecting with her cheek with enough force to snap her head to the side. In all her 20 years, her father had never struck her. The shock of it silenced her more effectively than his words ever could. "Get in the wagon," he ordered, his voice shaking. "We will discuss this at home." Tears blurring her vision, Zara climbed onto the wooden seat. Her cheek stung, but the pain in her heart was far worse. The father she had known and loved was gone, replaced by this desperate man willing to sacrifice his only child for financial security. As they pulled away from the hitching post, she caught sight of Knox Sutton watching from the mercantile doorway, his expression unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. For a brief, wild moment, she considered jumping from the wagon and running to him, this stranger who had defended her honor and spoken of choice when everyone else demanded her submission. But the moment passed, and Zara turned her face toward home, her mind already formulating a plan. If her father would not listen to reason, then she would have to save herself. The ride home was conducted in stony silence. Harrison stared straight ahead, the lines around his mouth deepening with each mile. Zara kept her gaze fixed on the distant mountains, trying to imagine what lay beyond them. At the ranch, her father disappeared into his study without another word, leaving Zara to tend to her usual chores. She moved mechanically through the routine, feeding the chickens and gathering eggs with hands that trembled slightly. Their housekeeper, Mrs. Garcia, watched her with concerned eyes but knew better than to ask questions when the master of the house was in such a mood. That evening, Zara pleaded a headache to avoid the dinner at the hotel with Thornton. To her surprise, her father did not insist, merely nodding curtly before departing alone. Perhaps he feared another scene in public, or maybe Zara hardly dared hope some small part of him regretted his actions. Once he was gone, she went to her room and began to plan in earnest. She had a small amount of money saved from selling her watercolors at the county fair last autumn. It wasn't much, but perhaps enough for a stagecoach ticket to Sacramento, where her mother's cousin lived. Aunt Margaret had always been kind in her letters, sending books and encouraging Zara's artistic pursuits. Surely she would offer sanctuary, at least until Zara could find employment and support herself. The thought of leaving the only home she had ever known filled Zara with dread. But the alternative, a life bound to a man like Albert Thornton, was unthinkable. She had watched her mother wither away under her father's increasing bitterness as the ranch struggled, and she had promised herself a different fate. She was carefully folding her warmest shawl into a small valise when she heard hoofbeats approaching the house. Peering out her window, she expected to see her father returning early from town. Instead, the silvery moonlight revealed a lone rider dismounting at their gate, a tall figure, whose movements she immediately recognized, despite having seen him only once before. Knox Sutton removed his hat as he approached the porch, and Zara's heart began to race. What was he doing here? Had he truly meant his words in the store, or was this some new complication she couldn't afford? She hurried downstairs, reaching the front door just as his knock sounded. Taking a deep breath to steady herself, she opened it a crack. "Mr. Sutton," she said, surprised at how calm her voice sounded. "My father isn't home." "I know," he replied. "I saw him at the hotel with Thornton. I came to see you, Miss Reynolds." Propriety dictated that she should close the door immediately. No respectable woman received a man alone at night, especially one she barely knew, but Zara found herself widening the opening instead. "That's highly improper, Mr. Sutton." His smile was fleeting but warmed his stormy eyes. "I reckon we're past worrying about proper, considering the circumstances." Zara hesitated, then stepped aside to let him enter. Mrs. Garcia had retired to her quarters behind the kitchen, and the house was quiet save for the steady ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. "Why are you here?" she asked, leading him into the parlor but leaving the door open to maintain some semblance of propriety. Knox stood awkwardly in the center of the room, his hat in his hands, looking out of place among the feminine furnishings her mother had once cherished. "I came to make sure you were all right," he said finally. "Your father seemed forceful today." Zara's hand unconsciously rose to her cheek, though the redness had faded. "I'm fine, but I still don't understand why you involved yourself in my affairs." Knox ran a hand through his dark hair, leaving it slightly rumpled. "I've seen what happens to women who are traded like commodities, Miss Reynolds. My own sister was married off to a man twice her age when our parents died. He worked her to death in 3 years. His jaw tightened at the memory. "No woman deserves that fate." "I'm sorry about your sister," Zara said softly, understanding now his passionate defense in the store. "Thornton's got a reputation that stretches beyond Porterville," Knox continued. "I've heard stories from ranch hands who have worked for him. He's not a kind man, especially to those he considers his property." A chill ran down Zara's spine. "I've sensed as much, but my father is desperate. The drought has nearly ruined us and Thornton controls the water rights we need." Knox nodded grimly. "It's an old tactic. Create desperation, then offer salvation at an unconscionable price." He looked at her directly. "Are you going to go through with it?" Zara glanced at the staircase, thinking of the half-packed valise in her room. "No, I was planning to leave tonight, actually. My mother's cousin lives in Sacramento." "Traveling alone would be dangerous," he said, concern evident in his voice. "The road to Sacramento passes through some rough country." "I don't have many options, Mr. Sutton." He was silent for a moment, seemingly wrestling with a decision. "I could accompany you part of the way. I'm heading north myself." Zara stared at him, astonished by the offer. "You don't even know me. Why would you do that?" "Because everyone deserves a chance at freedom, Miss Reynolds, and because—" He trailed off, a faint color rising in his tanned cheeks. "Because I couldn't live with myself if I rode away knowing what awaits you here." There was something in his earnest expression that touched Zara deeply. In a world where men like her father and Albert Thornton saw her as a means to an end, Knox Sutton saw her as a person deserving of choice and dignity. "I can't ask that of you," she said finally. "You didn't ask, I offered." His smile returned, more confident now. "We could leave at first light. Your father and Thornton won't know you're gone until it's too late to catch up." It was madness to consider it to place her trust in a man she had met only hours ago. Yet something about Knox Sutton inspired confidence. Perhaps it was the honest directness of his gaze, or the way he had stood up to Thornton without hesitation. "Let me think about it," she said, moving toward the door to indicate that their improper meeting should end. Knox nodded, settling his hat back on his head. "I'll be camped by the creek west of town. If you decide to come, be there before sunrise." He paused at the threshold. "Whatever you decide, Miss Reynolds, I wish you well." "Thank you, Mr. Sutton, for everything." After he departed, Zara stood on the porch watching his figure disappear into the darkness. The night was still, the familiar sounds of crickets and distant coyotes the only company for her turbulent thoughts. Returning to her room, she sat on the edge of her bed, the half-packed valise a testament to her determination. Knox's offer changed everything. Traveling with protection would dramatically increase her chances of reaching Sacramento safely. Yet it meant putting her life in the hands of a man she knew almost nothing about. What did she know of Knox Sutton? He was kind. He was principled. He had defended her when no one else would. But he was also a drifter, a man without roots, passing through Porterville on his way to some unknown destination. She was still deliberating when she heard the front door open and her father's heavy tread in the hallway. Quickly, she shoved the valise under her bed and pretended to be asleep when his footsteps paused outside her door. The next morning, Zara rose before dawn, her decision made. She had spent the night weighing her options, and concluded that the risk of traveling with Knox Sutton was far less than the certainty of life with Albert Thornton. She dressed quickly in her sturdiest skirt and blouse, tucking an extra shawl and her mother's locket into the valise along with her small savings. The house was silent as she crept downstairs, pausing only to leave a brief note on the kitchen table. "I cannot marry a man I do not love. Please forgive me. I will write when I am settled." The words seemed inadequate for all she wanted to say to her father, but time was short, and her courage might fail if she lingered. Taking a deep breath, Zara slipped out the back door into the pre-dawn darkness. The walk to the creek west of town was longer than she had anticipated, and the weight of her valise grew heavier with each step. By the time she spotted the faint glow of a campfire through the trees, the eastern sky was beginning to lighten with the first hint of sunrise. Knox was already awake, boiling coffee over a small fire. His horse, a sturdy bay, was saddled and ready nearby. When he saw Zara approaching, he rose to his feet, relief evident in his expression. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said, taking her valise. "Neither was I," Zara admitted. "But I couldn't stay," he nodded, understanding in his eyes. "We should move quickly. Your father will start searching as soon as he discovers you're gone." "Where are we headed?" she asked, accepting a tin cup of strong coffee that he poured for her. "North, toward the Sierra foothills. There's a stagecoach stop in Oakdale where you can catch a coach to Sacramento. It's about 3 days' ride from here." Zara's heart sank. "I didn't realize it was so far. I only have enough money for the stagecoach fare." Knox shook his head. "Don't worry about that. I've got supplies enough for both of us." He gestured to his saddlebags, which were indeed well stocked. "I can't accept charity, Mr. Sutton." "It's not charity, Miss Reynolds. Consider it a loan if your pride requires it." His tone was light, but his eyes were serious. "And I think, given our current arrangement, you might call me Knox." Despite her anxiety, Zara found herself smiling. "Then you must call me Zara." They broke camp quickly, Knox expertly obliterating all signs of their presence. He helped Zara mount the bay, then swung up behind her. The sensation of his solid chest against her back was disconcerting but not unpleasant. "Ready?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. Zara nodded, unable to trust her voice. As the horse moved forward at a steady pace, She looked back once at the valley she had called home. In the distance, she could see the Reynolds ranch, peaceful in the early morning light, unaware that its daughter had chosen freedom over duty. They traveled steadily through the morning, keeping to less traveled paths to avoid detection. Knox was a skilled horseman, navigating the rough terrain with confidence. He was also, Zara discovered, a good conversationalist when encouraged. "How did you come to be in Porterville?" she asked as they paused to rest the horse near a small stream. Knox stretched his long legs, leaning against a boulder. "I've been working my way north from Arizona Territory. I was a scout for the cavalry there for a few years after the war." "The war? You seem too young to have fought in the war between the states," he smiled wryly. "I lied about my age. Enlisted in '64 when I was 16. Served with a Texas regiment until Appomattox, then drifted west like a lot of men with nowhere else to go." Zara tried to imagine him as a boy soldier, facing the horrors of war at an age when most youths were still in school. It explained something of the maturity and quiet confidence she sensed in him. "And your destination now? You mentioned San Francisco." "My uncle left me some property there. Never met the man, but his lawyer tracked me down in Tucson. Figured I might as well see what it's worth." "That sounds like an adventure," Zara said, unable to keep the wistfulness from her voice. Knox studied her curiously. "What would you do, Zara Reynolds, if you could do anything at all?" The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked her that before. I'm not sure. Travel, perhaps. See the mountains and the ocean. Paint landscapes that take people's breath away." She blushed at her own boldness. "It sounds foolish when I say it aloud." "Not foolish at all," Knox said seriously. "Dreams keep us going when nothing else will." They continued their journey, the conversation flowing more easily as the miles passed beneath the bay's steady hooves. Zara learned that Knox had grown up on a small farm in Kentucky, that he could play the harmonica but not the guitar, and that he had once ridden with a man who claimed to have seen a genuine sea serpent off the coast of California. In turn, she told him about her mother's passion for books, about the watercolor techniques she had taught herself from a dog-eared manual, and about her secret ambition to have her paintings displayed in a real gallery someday. By late afternoon, they had covered a considerable distance, but Knox insisted they push on until dusk to put as much space as possible between them and any potential pursuit. "Your father strikes me as a determined man," he said, when Zara protested that they needed to rest. "And Thornton won't take kindly to losing his bride-to-be." The reminder of what she had left behind sobered Zara. Would her father be furious or heartbroken when he found her note? Would he understand eventually that she couldn't sacrifice her future for his debts? When they finally made camp in a sheltered hollow, Zara was exhausted but exhilarated. She had never traveled this far from home before, never slept beneath the open sky. While Knox prepared a simple meal of jerky, hardtack, and coffee, she watched the sunset paint the western clouds in shades of gold and crimson that no artist could fully capture. "It's beautiful," she murmured, trying to memorize the scene for a future painting. Knox nodded, handing her a tin plate. "Different beauty everywhere you go. That's one advantage of a wandering life." "Have you always wandered?" she asked, accepting the food gratefully. He considered the question, chewing thoughtfully. "Not always by choice. After my sister died, I tried settling in a few places. Worked as a ranch hand, a miner, even a deputy sheriff for a spell in Colorado. Nothing felt right. And now, will San Francisco be different?" Knox's expression turned reflective. "Maybe. Or maybe I'll sell whatever my uncle left me and keep moving. Hard to know until I get there." They ate in companionable silence as darkness fell completely. The night was mild, the stars emerging one by one until the sky was a tapestry of silver light. Knox built up the fire, then spread his bedroll on one side of it, indicating that Zara should take the other. "I'll keep watch for a while," he said, checking his rifle. "You should get some sleep." Zara hesitated, suddenly aware of the impropriety of their situation. She was alone in the wilderness with a man she barely knew, dependent entirely on his honor. As if reading her thoughts, Knox said quietly, "You're safe with me, Zara. I swear it on my sister's memory." His sincerity was unmistakable, and Zara felt her tension ease. "I know," she said simply, and was surprised to realize it was true. Despite the brevity of their acquaintance, she trusted Knox Sutton more than men she had known all her life. She settled onto the bedroll, wrapping herself in the blanket he provided. Exhaustion quickly overcame her, and she drifted to sleep with the sound of the fire crackling and Knox's low humming creating a cocoon of security around her. Zara woke to the scent of coffee and the soft murmur of Knox's voice. Opening her eyes, she saw him standing a short distance away, speaking to his horse as he brushed its coat. The domestic scene touched something inside her, this man who could face down bullies like Thornton, but showed such gentleness to animals. "Good morning," she called, sitting up and trying to smooth her disheveled hair. Knox turned with a smile that made her heart skip unexpectedly. "Morning. Coffee's ready if you want some." They broke their fast with the last of the hardtack and some dried apples Knox produced from his saddlebag. As they ate, he unfolded a worn map, showing Zara their route for the day. "We'll follow this creek north for about 10 miles, then cut northeast through these foothills," he explained, his finger tracing the path. "There's a small settlement here where we can resupply if needed." "Do you think my father will have sent men after us?" Zara asked, the question that had been nagging at her since they departed. Knox refolded the map carefully. "Possible. Thornton certainly has the means to hire men, and your father knows this country better than we do. We'll need to stay alert." The day passed much like the previous one, with steady travel interspersed with breaks to rest the horse and stretch their legs. Knox proved to be a knowledgeable guide, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of the land they traversed. He knew the names of plants Zara had never seen before, could read weather patterns in the clouds, and once stopped abruptly to indicate fresh bear tracks crossing their path. By mid-afternoon, they reached the small settlement Knox had mentioned, little more than a trading post and a handful of cabins nestled in a wooded valley. While Zara waited with the horse, Knox went inside to purchase supplies, returning with fresh bread, cheese, and 2 apples. "Any news?" she asked as they continued their journey, sharing the welcome fresh food. "Nothing about us specifically," he replied, "but the storekeeper mentioned that a group of riders passed through early this morning, heading north. Could be coincidence." Zara's stomach tightened with anxiety. "Or it could be Thornton's men." "We'll be careful," Knox assured her. "Change our route a bit, stick to higher ground where we can see anyone approaching." The adjustment meant rougher traveling, but Zara didn't complain. The thought of being dragged back to Porterville and forced to marry Thornton gave her the strength to endure any discomfort. As they picked their way through increasingly rugged terrain, she found herself stealing glances at Knox's profile, admiring the quiet competence with which he handled every challenge. They made camp earlier than planned, finding a defensible position on a rocky ledge overlooking the valley they had traversed. Knox was more vigilant than the previous night, keeping his rifle close and frequently scanning the darkening landscape below. "Tell me more about your sister," Zara said as they sat beside the small fire, hoping conversation might ease the tension. Knox's expression softened at the mention of his sister. Catherine was 5 years older than me. She practically raised me after our mother died. Smart as a whip, could recite poetry and do sums faster than our schoolmaster. His voice grew distant with memory. She wanted to be a teacher, had the patience for it, the gift of making difficult things seem simple. She sounds wonderful, she would have liked you, I think. She had the same spark in her, the unwillingness to accept what others decided was her fate. What happened to her husband after she died? Zara asked hesitantly. Knox's jaw tightened. He's still alive, remarried a month after we buried her. Another desperate family, another young woman with no say in her future. He poked at the fire, sending sparks into the night air. That's why I couldn't just ride away when I saw what was happening to you. It was like seeing Catherine's story beginning all over again. Zara reached out impulsively, placing her hand on his arm. Thank you for that, for seeing me when others didn't. Their eyes met across the fire, and something passed between them, a connection deeper than their brief acquaintance could explain. For a moment, Zara thought he might reach for her hand, but then a distant sound caught his attention. Knox was on his feet instantly, rifle ready as he moved to the edge of their camp. Zara held her breath, straining to hear what had alarmed him. Then she caught it too, the faint jingle of tack and the muffled thud of hooves on soft earth. Riders, Knox whispered, returning to her side. At least 3, maybe 4, coming up the valley. Thornton's men, can't be sure, but we shouldn't take chances. We need to move. Quickly, they extinguished the fire and packed their meager camp. The night was dark, the moon not yet risen, which would help conceal their movement but also made traveling treacherous. Knox led the way on foot, guiding the horse with Zara mounted, picking their path carefully over the rocky ground. They moved in tense silence for nearly an hour, climbing higher into the foothills until they found shelter in a dense stand of pines. Only then did Knox relax slightly, helping Zara down from the saddle. We'll wait here until dawn, he said. Too dangerous to keep moving in the dark. What if they find us? Zara couldn't keep the fear from her voice. Knox's hand found hers in the darkness, strong and reassuring. They won't. And if they do, I won't let them take you back. The quiet certainty in his voice calmed her racing heart. They settled on the soft pine needles, huddled close for warmth without the fire they dared not light. Despite her anxiety, Zara found herself drifting into sleep, lulled by Knox's steady presence beside her and the rhythmic breathing of the horse tethered nearby. She woke to gray dawn light and Knox's gentle shake. We need to go, he said urgently. I spotted riders down in the valley. They moved swiftly, traveling higher into the mountains where the terrain grew increasingly difficult. By mid-morning, they had crossed a ridge that offered a panoramic view of the land below. Knox pulled the bay to a halt, studying the valley with narrowed eyes. There, he said, pointing to a distant group of riders following the path they had taken the day before. 4 men, well armed from the looks of it. Zara squinted, trying to make out details. Can you tell if my father is with them? Knox shook his head. Too far to say. But they're definitely tracking us. What do we do? Change plans. Oakdale's still 2 days' ride at our current pace, and they're gaining on us. We need to find somewhere safe for you to wait while I draw them off. No, the word burst from Zara with unexpected force. I won't let you put yourself in danger for me. Knox turned in the saddle to look at her, his expression a mixture of surprise and something warmer. I appreciate the concern, but I've dealt with men like this before. We stay together, Zara insisted. There must be another way to reach Sacramento. Knox studied the map again, considering their options. There's a mining settlement called Copper Creek about 15 miles east of here. Rough place, but they have a telegraph office. We could send word to your aunt in Sacramento, ask her to meet us. Would that be safer than continuing to Oakdale? It's closer, and in the opposite direction from where they're searching. Worth a try. They altered their course immediately, pushing eastward through increasingly mountainous terrain. The journey was arduous, but Zara didn't complain, aware that her freedom, perhaps even her life, depended on reaching Copper Creek before their pursuers realized they had changed direction. By late afternoon, dark clouds had gathered overhead, and a chill wind whipped through the pines. Knox eyed the sky with concern. Storm coming. We need to find shelter. They pressed on for another hour until Knox spotted a dilapidated cabin nestled in a small clearing. It appeared abandoned, the door hanging askew on rusted hinges, but the roof seemed mostly intact. Not ideal, Knox said as they approached cautiously, but better than being caught in the open when that hits. He gestured to the darkening sky, where lightning now flickered among the clouds. The interior of the cabin was dusty but dry. Old furniture remained: a rough-hewn table, a broken chair, and a narrow bed frame with rotting rope supports. Knox secured the horse in a lean-to attached to the rear of the cabin, then set about making the space habitable while Zara shook out the threadbare blanket they had found folded on a shelf. The storm broke just as they finished, rain lashing against the cabin in wind-driven sheets. Thunder boomed overhead, and Zara couldn't help jumping at a particularly loud crack. "Sounds like the world's ending out there," she said, trying to mask her nervousness with humor. Knox smiled as he lit a small fire in the stone fireplace, using wood from a pile stacked beside it. "Just nature reminding us who's in charge." He settled beside her on their improvised seat of saddle blankets. "At least it will wash away our tracks." The fire cast a warm glow around the cabin, transforming the shabby space into something almost cozy. Outside, the storm raged, but within these walls, Zara felt unexpectedly at peace. She found herself studying Knox's profile as he gazed into the flames, the strong line of his jaw, the fan of dark lashes against his cheeks, the slight curve of his lips as he sensed her watching. "What are you thinking about?" he asked without turning. Heat rose in Zara's cheeks at being caught staring. "About how strange life is. A week ago I thought my future was set. Now here I am, miles from home, sheltering in an abandoned cabin during a thunderstorm with a man I barely know." Knox turned to face her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "Do you regret it, coming with me?" "No," Zara answered without hesitation. "I'd rather face 1,000 storms than one day as Albert Thornton's wife." His expression softened. "You deserve better than either fate. What about you? Do you regret helping me? It's caused you considerable trouble." Knox reached out slowly, brushing a strand of hair from her face with a gentleness that made her breath catch. Not for a moment. The simple touch, the softness in his eyes, the intimate closeness of their shelter all combined to create a moment of perfect connection. Zara found herself leaning toward him, drawn by a force as powerful as gravity. Knox remained very still, his gaze dropping to her lips, a question in his eyes. A tremendous crash of thunder broke the spell, making them both start. Knox pulled back, clearing his throat. "We should try to get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day." Zara nodded, simultaneously disappointed and relieved. Whatever was growing between them was too new, too fragile to rush. And despite the strength of her feelings, she was acutely aware of her vulnerability alone, dependent on this man, fleeing a forced marriage. The last thing she needed was to leap headlong into another attachment without careful consideration. They arranged their bedrolls on opposite sides of the fire, maintaining a proper distance that felt both necessary and torturous. As Zara drifted toward sleep, lulled by the rhythm of the rain on the cabin roof, Her last waking thought was that Knox Sutton had awakened something in her that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with possibility. Morning brought clearing skies and renewed determination. They set out early, both tacitly avoiding mention of the previous night's almost kiss. The storm had indeed obscured their trail, leaving the ground soft and muddy but free of recognizable tracks. Copper Creek appeared on the horizon by mid-afternoon, a cluster of rough buildings clinging to a hillside scarred by mining operations. Unlike the peaceful farming communities of the valley, this was a place built on men's dreams of quick wealth, its impermanence evident in the hasty construction and lack of amenities. "Not exactly welcoming," Zara murmured as they approached. Knox nodded grimly. "Mining towns rarely are, especially for a woman. Stay close to me and let me do the talking." The main street, if it could be called that, was little more than a muddy track lined with saloons, boarding houses, and supply stores. Men in dirty work clothes lounged on porches or hurried about their business, many casting curious glances at Zara as they passed. She was acutely aware of being one of the few women visible, and certainly the only one dressed respectably. Knox led them directly to a two-story building labeled Copper Creek Hotel and Telegraph, tying the bay to a post outside. "Wait here," he instructed, helping Zara down. "I'll check if they have a room available and send a telegram to your aunt." While he went inside, Zara stood nervously beside the horse, trying to ignore the stares of passing miners. A group of rough-looking men emerged from a nearby saloon, their loud laughter cutting through the general din of the street. One spotted Zara and nudged his companions, saying something that made them all grin unpleasantly. Zara turned away, heart pounding, wishing Knox would hurry. She could sense the men approaching even before their shadows fell across her. "Well, look what we have here," one said, his voice slurred with drink despite the early hour. "A real lady gracing our humble town." Zara kept her eyes averted. "My companion will return shortly," she said firmly. "Companion, is it?" Another man sneered. "Fancy word for it." "How much does he pay you, sweetheart?" Anger flared through Zara's fear. "You are mistaken, sir. Please leave me alone." The first man reached for her arm. "Don't be like that. We're just being friendly." Before his fingers could make contact, a hand clamped around his wrist with punishing force. Knox had returned, his expression dangerously calm. "The lady asked you to leave her alone," he said quietly. The miner tried to jerk free, wincing at Knox's grip. "No harm meant, mister, just making conversation." Knox released him with a slight push. "Find someone else to converse with." For a tense moment, it seemed the men might challenge him. There were 4 of them to his 1, and they were clearly spoiling for trouble. But something in Knox's steady stance, or perhaps the way his hand rested near the gun at his hip, made them reconsider. "Come on, boys," the leader muttered. Plenty of more sociable company at Molly's place. As they slouched away, Zara released the breath she'd been holding. "Thank you." Knox's expression softened as he turned to her. "I shouldn't have left you alone. This isn't a safe place for a woman on her own." He took her arm gently. "I've sent the telegram and secured us a room for the night. With any luck, we'll hear back from your aunt by morning." The hotel was barely deserving of the name, a ramshackle building with narrow stairs leading to a dark hallway lined with doors. Their room was small but clean enough, containing a bed, a washstand, and a single chair. "I'll sleep on the floor," Knox said immediately, seeing Zara's discomfort at the single bed. "Are you sure?" "After riding all day, I've slept on worse," he assured her with a smile. They ventured out only briefly to purchase a hot meal at the hotel's attached dining room, both aware of the curious glances they received. The other patrons clearly wondered about their relationship, and Zara could almost hear the assumptions being made. Under different circumstances, she would have been mortified by the damage to her reputation. Now, with Thornton's men potentially still searching for her, such concerns seemed trivial. Back in their room, Knox sat by the window, keeping watch on the street below while Zara perched on the edge of the bed, reviewing their situation. "What if my aunt doesn't respond, or can't meet us?" she asked, voicing the worry that had been nagging at her. Knox turned from the window. "Then we'll find another solution. The important thing is keeping you safe and free to make your own choices. And you, what happens after you deliver me to Sacramento? Will you continue to San Francisco?" There was a pause before he answered. "That was the plan." Something in his tone made Zara's heart flutter. "And now?" Knox's gaze was steady, revealing more than his careful words. "Now I'm not sure of anything except that I want you to be happy, Zara Reynolds." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken feelings. Zara found herself rising from the bed, drawn to him as she had been in the cabin during the storm. This time, there was no thunder to interrupt them as she stopped before him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "You've risked everything for a stranger," she said softly. "Why?" Knox stood, diminishing the already small space between them. "You stopped being a stranger to me the moment I saw you stand up to Thornton in that store." His voice was low, intimate. "There's a strength in you, Zara, a fire that shouldn't be extinguished by men who see you as property." His words touched something deep inside her, a recognition of her own worth that she had almost forgotten in the face of her father's demands. Without conscious thought, Zara raised her hand to Knox's cheek, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "And what do you see when you look at me?" she whispered. Knox's eyes darkened. "Everything I never knew I was searching for." The confession hung in the air between them for a heartbeat before he lowered his head, closing the final distance. His lips met hers with exquisite gentleness, a question rather than a demand. Zara answered by leaning into him, her hand sliding from his cheek to the nape of his neck. The kiss deepened. Awakening sensations, Zara had never experienced a warmth that spread through her entire body, a dizzying lightness in her head. When they finally separated, both were breathing quickly, eyes wide with the revelation of what had just happened. "I shouldn't have done that," Knox said, though he made no move to increase the distance between them. "I wanted you to," Zara replied, surprising herself with her boldness. "I still do." A groan escaped him, half desire, half frustration. "You're vulnerable, Zara, running from one man's control. I won't take advantage of that, no matter how much I want to kiss you again." His restraint, his concern for her well-being even at the cost of his own desires, only increased Zara's growing feelings for him. She stepped back reluctantly, acknowledging the wisdom in his words even as her body protested the separation. "You're right. This is all happening so quickly." She returned to the bed, sitting on its edge with her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "But I want you to know that what I feel for you has nothing to do with gratitude or circumstance. It's about who you are, Knox Sutton." His smile was both tender and rueful. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will bring answers, one way or another." Knox made his bed on the floor with spare blankets provided by the hotel, while Zara lay above on the lumpy mattress, her mind too full for sleep, despite her physical exhaustion. The memory of their kiss kept replaying itself, the softness of his lips, the security of his arms around her, the feeling of rightness that had enveloped her. Was it possible to know so quickly? To feel such certainty about a man she had known for only days? It defied everything she had been taught about proper courtship and suitable matches. Yet in her heart, Zara knew that Knox Sutton understood her in ways that no one else ever had saw her, not as a daughter to be bartered or a wife to be controlled, but as a woman with dreams and strengths of her own. Sleep claimed her eventually. Her last conscious thought a prayer that tomorrow would bring not just answers about her aunt, but clarity about her future with the man sleeping just feet away. Morning came with a sharp rap at their door. Knox was on his feet instantly, gun in hand, while Zara sat up in alarm. A voice called through the door, "Telegraph for Mr. Sutton." Knox visibly relaxed, tucking the gun back into its holster before opening the door to accept the yellow paper from a young boy who scampered away as soon as his task was complete. "It's from your aunt," Knox said, scanning the message. "She says she'll meet you in Sacramento as planned. She's concerned but relieved you're safe." Relief washed over Zara. "When can we leave?" "There's a stagecoach departing for Sacramento this afternoon. It's a rough journey but faster than continuing on horseback." He hesitated, then added, "There's something else." The telegraph operator mentioned that 4 riders arrived late last night, asking questions about a young woman traveling with a tall, dark-haired man. Fear clutched at Zara's heart. "They found us. They haven't seen us yet, but it won't take long in a town this size. We need to move quickly." Knox was already gathering their few belongings. "I'll secure our passage on the stage while you pack. Don't leave this room until I return." After he left, Zara moved mechanically, folding her spare clothes and repacking her valise. Her hands trembled slightly at the thought of being so close to Thornton's men. What would happen if they caught her? Would they force her to return to Porterville and marry Thornton, or would something worse await her for the embarrassment she had caused? And what of Knox? He had interfered with Thornton's plans, helped her escape. Men like Thornton didn't forgive such actions easily. When Knox returned 20 minutes later, his expression was grim. "They've been showing your picture around town. Someone at the telegraph office must have talked. The stage doesn't leave for 3 hours, too long to wait." "What do we do?" Zara asked, fighting to keep the panic from her voice. Knox thought for a moment, then came to a decision. "There's a freight wagon leaving for the next town over in half an hour. The drivers agreed to take us if we can be ready. From there, we can catch the Sacramento stage tomorrow morning. Will that be enough to lose them? It's our best chance." He took her hands in his grip warm and steady. "I won't let them take you, Zara. I promise you that." The conviction in his voice steadied her. "I know." They slipped out the back entrance of the hotel, keeping to side alleys as they made their way to the edge of town where the freight wagon waited. The driver, a grizzled man with a scar running from eye to chin, nodded curtly as they approached. "Under the canvas," he instructed, gesturing to the wagon bed loaded with crates and covered with a heavy tarpaulin. "And be quick about it. I ain't waiting if trouble comes." Knox helped Zara climb into the wagon, then joined her, pulling the canvas down to conceal them among the cargo. The space was cramped and dark, smelling of burlap and tobacco. Zara found herself pressed against Knox's side as the wagon lurched into motion, the wooden wheels creaking over the rutted road. "How long until we reach the next town?" she whispered. 6 hours if we're lucky," Knox replied softly. "Try to rest if you can." Rest seemed impossible in their uncomfortable position, but Zara closed her eyes anyway, focusing on the steady rhythm of Knox's breathing beside her rather than the fear threatening to overwhelm her thoughts. They had been traveling for perhaps an hour when the wagon suddenly slowed, then stopped completely. Voices drifted to them, the driver's gravelly tone responding to questions from men whose words they couldn't quite make out. Knox's arm tightened around Zara's shoulders, his other hand moving to his gun. They held their breath, straining to hear the conversation. "Seen a young woman and a tall fella?" one of the men was asking. "Ain't seen nobody matching that description," the driver replied. "Just making my regular run to Silver Springs with mining supplies." Mind if we take a look in your wagon? Zara's heart pounded so loudly she was certain they would hear it. Knox shifted slightly, positioning himself in front of her as much as the cramped space would allow. "Suit yourself," the driver said, "but make it quick. I got a schedule to keep." Footsteps approached the wagon, and Zara buried her face against Knox's chest, praying with an intensity she had never known before. The canvas was lifted slightly at the rear, allowing a shaft of sunlight to penetrate their hiding place. "Nothing but crates," a man's voice said after a moment. "Too small to hide anyone." "Check the front," another ordered, more footsteps, then the sound of the driver's seat being examined. Zara didn't dare breathe until she heard the first man speak again, clear. "Must have headed west instead of east." "Thornton won't be happy," the second voice grumbled. "He wants that girl found before she reaches Sacramento. We'll catch up to them. 2 people on 1 horse can't move that fast." The canvas dropped back into place, and moments later the wagon lurched forward again. Only when the sounds of the horses had faded completely did Knox relax his protective stance. "They don't know we changed plans," he whispered. "That gives us an advantage." Zara nodded, too shaken to speak immediately. The close call had made the danger they faced painfully real. Her father must have indeed joined forces with Thornton to send men after her so persistently. The thought that her own father would hunt her down like a runaway slave broke something inside her that she hadn't realized was still whole. Silent tears slid down her cheeks, and Knox pulled her closer, his hand stroking her hair with tender understanding. No words were needed. His presence was comfort enough. The journey to Silver Springs seemed endless, each mile a test of endurance as they remained hidden under the stifling canvas. By the time the wagon finally rolled to a halt in the small settlement, Zara's limbs were numb and her throat parched with thirst. The driver gave a low whistle, their signal that it was safe to emerge. Knox pushed the canvas aside cautiously, blinking in the late afternoon sunlight before helping Zara climb stiffly from their hiding place. "Made it," the driver said laconically, accepting the payment Knox pressed into his hand. "Stage office is down the street. They leave for Sacramento at dawn." Silver Springs was smaller than Copper Creek but more orderly, its buildings arranged in neat rows along a main street that boasted actual boardwalks. A small hotel stood across from the stage office, its whitewashed facade and curtained windows promising basic but clean accommodations. Knox procured a room, 2 rooms actually, despite the expense, and ordered hot water and a meal sent up immediately. The luxury of washing away the dust of their journey and changing into fresh clothing revived Zara's spirits somewhat, though anxiety still gnawed at her as she joined Knox for a simple dinner in the hotel's small dining room. "If all goes well, you'll be in Sacramento by tomorrow evening," Knox said as they ate. "Your aunt will be waiting at the stage office there." Zara looked up from her plate, suddenly realizing what his words implied. "And you? Will you continue to San Francisco?" Knox's eyes met hers across the table, conflicted emotions visible in their depths. "That was the plan." "Plans change," Zara said softly. His smile was tinged with sadness. "Yes, they do, but your safety comes first. We need to get you to your aunt before we consider other possibilities." The unspoken feelings between them hung in the air, too new and fragile to be named, yet too powerful to be denied. Zara wanted to tell him that in the space of a few days, he had become essential to her happiness, that the thought of continuing to Sacramento without him filled her with a hollowness that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with loss. But Knox was right. Her safety had to be the priority. Once she was secure in Sacramento, there would be time to explore the connection that had formed between them with such unexpected speed and intensity. They parted at her door, Knox's restraint evident in the careful distance he maintained despite the longing in his eyes. His good night was formal, proper a gentleman's farewell, that nonetheless carried the weight of emotions too complex for simple words. Zara slept fitfully, her dreams a confused tangle of pursuit and escape, always with Knox just beyond her reach. She woke before dawn, dressing quickly in the pre-dawn darkness, eager to be on their way. The stage was already waiting when they arrived at the office, the driver loading mail bags while a pair of travelers, a middle-aged couple, stood nearby with their luggage. Knox purchased their tickets and stowed Zara's valise, his movements efficient but his expression distracted. "Something's wrong," Zara said quietly, recognizing the tension in his shoulders. "What is it?" Knox glanced around before answering, his voice low. "One of the stable boys mentioned riders coming in late last night, asking questions about new arrivals. They may have tracked us here." Fear clenched in Zara's stomach. "Then we need to leave immediately. The stage doesn't depart for another 20 minutes, too long to wait if they're close." Knox made a swift decision. "Change of plans. I saw a side trail when we arrived yesterday, cuts through the hills toward Sacramento. Rougher terrain but less traveled. We're going back to traveling on horseback." Knox nodded. "I've already arranged to buy a horse from the livery. We'll leave now, while it's still dark enough to cover our tracks." Within minutes, they had retrieved Zara's valise and were headed toward the livery stable at the edge of town. The streets were still largely deserted, though lights were beginning to appear in windows as the town stirred to life. They had nearly reached the stable when the sound of approaching riders made them both freeze. Knox pulled Zara into the shadow of a building, his body shielding hers as 4 mounted men passed by, heading toward the center of town. "Thornton's men," Knox whispered, recognizing one of the riders. "They must have realized we changed direction." "They'll check the stage office first," Zara said, her mind racing. "But that won't buy us much time." Knox nodded grimly. "Let's move." The livery stable was dark and quiet. The stable boy Knox had spoken to earlier waiting with a saddled mare, a sturdy animal with intelligent eyes and a calm demeanor. "Fastest way to Sacramento?" Knox asked as he counted out payment. The boy scratched his head. "There's a trail through Blackwater Canyon, cuts half a day off the journey if you know the way, but it's treacherous in places, not for the faint-hearted." "We'll take it," Knox decided, helping Zara mount the mare. "Which direction?" "North out of town, then east at the lightning-struck oak." "Can't miss it. Trail's narrow but clear most of the way." They rode out as dawn was breaking, pushing the horses to a fast trot once they cleared the town limits. Behind them, Zara imagined she could hear shouts of discovery and pursuit, though the sound might have existed only in her fear-sharpened senses. The lightning-struck oak was indeed impossible to miss, a massive tree split down its center by some long-ago storm, its skeletal branches reaching toward the sky like supplicating arms. The trail beyond was as the stable boy had described. Narrow, winding through increasingly rugged country, but clearly marked by the passage of previous travelers. They rode steadily through the morning, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and eat a hasty meal from the provisions Knox had purchased in Silver Springs. The terrain grew more challenging as they climbed higher into the foothills, the trail sometimes barely wide enough for the horses to pass single file. By midday, they had reached the entrance to Blackwater Canyon, a deep gash in the mountains where a river had carved its way through solid rock over countless millennia. The trail descended steeply, hugging the canyon wall above a rushing stream far below. "Stay close," Knox instructed, taking the lead. "The footing gets tricky here." Zara followed carefully, trusting the mare's sure instincts on the narrow path. Despite the danger of their situation and the precarious trail, she found herself marveling at the wild beauty around them, the towering walls of the canyon, the play of sunlight on the water below, the unexpected bursts of wildflowers clinging to seemingly barren rock. They had traveled perhaps a mile into the canyon when Knox suddenly reined in, raising a hand for silence. Zara halted behind him, straining to hear what had alerted him. Then she caught it too, the distant sound of horses' hooves on rock, coming from the trail behind them. "They found our trail," Knox said grimly. "We need to move faster." But the nature of the canyon made speed dangerous. One misstep on the narrow path could send horse and rider plummeting to the rocks below. They pushed on as quickly as they dared, the sounds of pursuit growing gradually more distinct. The trail widened briefly around a bend, opening into a small plateau where the canyon wall receded. Knox pulled up, quickly surveying their surroundings. "There," he said, pointing to a narrow crevice in the rock face. "A side canyon. It might give us a place to hide until they pass." They urged their mounts toward the opening, which proved to be the entrance to a smaller ravine branching off from the main canyon. The path here was rougher, less traveled, but wide enough for their horses to navigate with care. After following the ravine for several hundred yards, they came to a place where a rock slide had partially blocked the way. Beyond it, the path seemed to continue, though it was difficult to see clearly through the jumble of boulders. "We can get the horses through," Knox decided after a quick examination. "But it will slow down anyone following us. They'll have to dismount and lead their animals one by one." They carefully picked their way across the obstacle, the horses snorting nervously as loose stones shifted under their hooves. Once on the other side, the ravine widened again, its walls soaring upward to create a natural fortress accessible only through the narrow passage they had just navigated. "Perfect," Knox murmured, scanning the enclosure. "We can defend this position if necessary." He helped Zara dismount, then tethered the horses where they could reach water from a small spring bubbling from the canyon wall. Zara sank onto a boulder, the tension of their flight suddenly catching up with her. "How did they find us so quickly?" Knox shook his head. "Someone in Silver Springs must have talked. Small towns, people notice strangers." He checked his revolver, then positioned himself near the rock slide where he could observe the approach without being seen. "With luck, they'll continue down the main canyon, thinking we're trying to outrun them rather than hide." Time passed with excruciating slowness as they waited in tense silence. Zara found herself counting her heartbeats, each one seeming to echo in the quiet ravine. When the sound of distant voices finally reached them, she froze, her eyes meeting Knox's across the space between them. He motioned for her to remain absolutely still, his hand resting on his gun. The voices grew clearer, men arguing about which direction to take. "They continued straight through," one said. "I can see fresh tracks." "Maybe," another replied doubtfully. "But this side path looks used too." "Split up," a third voice ordered. "Jackson, you and Miller check this ravine. Thompson and I will continue down the main trail. Fire 2 shots if you find anything." Footsteps approached the rock slide, accompanied by the clink of metal as the men dismounted. Knox moved silently to Zara's side, leading her deeper into the ravine where an outcropping of rock provided cover. "Stay here," he whispered. "If anything happens to me, follow the ravine. It likely connects back to the main canyon further down." Before she could protest, he was gone, moving with the silent efficiency of a man accustomed to danger. Zara pressed herself against the cool stone, heart pounding as she heard the men begin to clamber over the rock slide. "Looks like someone came through here," one said, his voice unnervingly close. "Fresh marks on the rocks." "Sutton's a crafty one," the other replied, "but he can't outfox men who have been tracking outlaws for years." The revelation that Knox might be known to these men, might have a past more complicated than he'd revealed, sent a chill through Zara. Yet her trust in him remained unshaken. Whatever he might have done before, the man she had come to know was honorable and good. A scattering of pebbles announced the men's successful crossing of the rock slide. Zara held her breath, praying they wouldn't spot the horses, which were hidden around a bend in the ravine wall. "Spread out," the first man ordered. "Check every crevice. They have to be here somewhere." The sound of bootsteps on stone grew closer. Zara pressed herself more tightly against the rock, wishing she could somehow melt into it. A shadow fell across the ground near her hiding place as one of the men approached. Then came the sound she had been dreading, a shout of discovery. "The horses!" "Over here!" Immediately after, gunshots echoed through the ravine, not the two shots that would have signaled success to their companions, but the rapid fire of conflict. Zara heard a man cry out in pain, then Knox's voice calling her name. She emerged from her hiding place to see Knox standing over one fallen man while the other retreated toward the rock slide, firing wildly as he went. Knox dodged behind a boulder, returning fire with careful precision. The fleeing man suddenly stumbled, Knox's bullet finding its mark in his leg. He fell, his gun skittering away across the stone. In an instant, Knox was upon him, disarming him completely and binding his hands with his own belt. "Are you all right?" Zara asked, rushing to Knox's side, her eyes scanning him for injuries. "I'm fine," he assured her, though his breathing was rapid from exertion. "But we need to move quickly. The others will have heard the shots." He checked the first man, who was unconscious but breathing, a bullet wound in his shoulder. After ensuring that both men were securely bound and unable to pursue them, Knox helped Zara mount her horse. "We'll continue through the ravine," he said, swinging into his own saddle. "It has to rejoin the main canyon eventually." As Knox had predicted, the ravine wound its way through the mountains before finally opening onto the main trail again, several miles downstream from where they had left it. They paused at the junction, listening carefully for any sound of pursuit. "I think we've lost them for now," Knox said after a moment, "but they'll find their companions eventually and the hunt will resume." "How much further to Sacramento?" Zara asked, fighting exhaustion. "If we keep moving, we can be there by nightfall tomorrow." He studied her face with concern. "You need rest, though. There's a way station about 2 hours ahead where we can stop safely." The way station proved to be little more than a simple cabin with attached stables, operated by an elderly couple who asked no questions, but provided hot food and clean beds for travelers willing to pay their modest fee. Knox arranged for a single room again, insisting on sleeping in a chair by the door while Zara took the bed. Despite her fatigue, sleep eluded Zara as questions tumbled through her mind. The men had spoken of Knox as if they knew of him, had called him crafty, had compared him to outlaws they had tracked. Was there more to his past than he had shared? "Knox," she said softly into the darkness, "those men seemed to know you." There was a long silence before he answered. "I've had some encounters with the law, nothing violent," he added quickly. "After the war I was young and reckless, ran with a rough crowd for a time, did some things I'm not proud of." "Is that why you understood my situation so well? Because you've been hunted before?" Another pause. "Partly. I know what it's like to feel trapped, to have your future decided by others. In my case, it was my own poor choices that did the trapping. In yours, it was men who should have protected you instead of using you." His honesty touched Zara deeply. He could have lied, could have painted himself as the flawless hero, but instead he offered her the truth, his past mistakes alongside his present principles. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "You deserve the truth, Zara, all of it." His voice was low in the darkness. "I wasn't always the man I am now. It took losing someone I loved to set me on a better path. Your sister." "Yes." The word was heavy with old grief. "After she died, I swore I'd never stand by while someone vulnerable was exploited again. That oath has led me into trouble more than once, but I've never regretted it." Zara lay in silence, absorbing his words, understanding now the depth of his commitment to helping her. It wasn't just attraction that had motivated him, nor simple kindness, but a profound personal code born of loss and regret. "You're a good man, Knox Sutton," she said finally. "Whatever you may have done in the past." His soft laugh held more wonder than humor. "I'm still not sure how a fine lady like you came to be traveling with a reformed troublemaker like me. But I'm grateful for it, Zara Reynolds, more grateful than I can say." The tenderness in his voice wrapped around her like a warm blanket, and Zara found herself drifting toward sleep at last, comforted by his presence and the growing certainty that what she felt for him was far more than the transient emotion of a woman rescued from danger. Morning came too soon, gray light filtering through the cabin's single window as Knox gently shook Zara awake. They departed before the elderly couple had even risen, leaving payment on the table and taking the fresh bread and cheese that had been left out for early travelers. The day's journey was arduous but uneventful, following the canyon trail as it gradually widened and descended toward more populated country. By late afternoon, they could see farmland in the distance, the first sign of their approach to civilization after days in the wilderness. "We'll reach the Sacramento road by sunset," Knox said as they paused to rest the horses. "From there, it's only a few hours to the city." Relief and apprehension mingled in Zara's heart. Safety was within reach, but so was separation from the man who had become so dear to her in such a short time. "What will you do?" she asked, the question she had been avoiding finally escaping her lips. "After you've delivered me to my aunt." Knox turned to face her fully, his eyes serious beneath the brim of his hat. "That depends on you, Zara." "On me." He dismounted, then helped her down from her horse, his hands lingering at her waist. "These past days have been the most dangerous of my life and the most meaningful. I set out to help a woman in trouble, and somewhere along the way, I found myself falling in love with her courage, her kindness, her determination to choose her own path." Zara's breath caught at the word love, a word neither of them had dared to speak until now. "I know it's fast," Knox continued, his voice low and intent. "Too fast, perhaps. You've been running from one man's control. The last thing you need is another man making claims on your future. But if you wanted time to know your own mind, to build a life in Sacramento, to be sure of what you want, I would wait." "Wait," Zara echoed, her heart pounding. Knox's smile was both tender and uncertain. "I have business in San Francisco that can't be avoided. Property to claim, legal matters to settle. It would take a month, maybe two. By then, you'd be established with your aunt, safe from Thornton's reach. And if, after that time, you found yourself thinking of a certain troublesome cowboy with any fondness—" He left the sentence unfinished, the question in his eyes completing it for him. Joy bubbled up inside Zara, bright and effervescent. "Knox Sutton, are you asking permission to court me properly once this adventure is concluded?" His laugh was warm with relief. "I suppose I am. Seems only right, after compromising your reputation so thoroughly by spiriting you across half of California." Zara reached up to touch his face, her fingertips tracing the strong line of his jaw. "You saved me from a life of misery. You respected my choices when no one else would." You risked your life to protect mine." Her voice softened. "And somewhere between Porterville and this moment, I fell in love with you too." The declaration hung in the air between them for a heartbeat before Knox closed the distance, his lips finding hers in a kiss that spoke of promise and possibility. Zara melted into him, her arms twining around his neck as she returned his kiss with all the emotion that had been building since that first day in the mercantile store. When they finally parted, both breathless, Knox rested his forehead against hers. "I'll come for you in Sacramento, Zara Reynolds. And if you still feel then as you do now, I'll ask a proper question on bended knee." "I'll be waiting," she promised, with the same answer ready. The remainder of their journey was filled with a new lightness, despite the continued need for vigilance. They reached the Sacramento road as twilight was falling, joining the increased traffic of wagons and riders heading toward the city. "Safety in numbers now," Knox observed as they fell in with a group of farmers returning from outlying fields. Thornton's men would be fools to try anything with so many witnesses. They entered Sacramento after dark, the city's lamps and busy streets a startling contrast to the wilderness they had traversed. Knox led them directly to the address. Zara's aunt had provided in her telegram a comfortable home on a tree-lined street in one of the city's better neighborhoods. Margaret Wilson proved to be a handsome widow in her 40s, with Zara's mother's kind eyes and forthright manner. She embraced her niece with genuine warmth, then extended the same welcome to Knox once the circumstances of their journey were explained. "You must both stay," she insisted. "I have plenty of room and you look exhausted, poor dears." Over a late supper, Zara related the full story of her father's arrangement with Thornton and their flight through the mountains. Her aunt listened with growing indignation, occasionally exclaiming over particularly outrageous details. "Your mother would never have allowed such a thing," Margaret declared when Zara had finished. "She had higher hopes for you than to be bartered away to secure water rights. You were right to leave, and fortunate to find such a champion." She smiled warmly at Knox. "You have my eternal gratitude, Mr. Sutton." "It was my privilege, madam," Knox replied with genuine respect. "Your niece is an extraordinary woman." The look that passed between them was not lost on Margaret, whose eyes twinkled with knowing amusement. "Well, I can see there's more to this story than a simple rescue. But that can wait for morning. You both need rest." Alone in the guest bedroom Margaret had prepared for her, Zara felt true security for the first time in days. The soft bed, the locked doors, the presence of family all combined to create a sanctuary where Thornton's threats could not reach her. Yet as she drifted toward sleep, it was not safety that filled her thoughts but the man sleeping down the hall, the man who had taught her that true protection came not from control but from respect, not from ownership but from love. The following days passed in a blur of activity as Zara settled into life with her aunt. Margaret, a woman of independent means and progressive ideas, welcomed her niece not as a burden but as a companion whose artistic talents she immediately sought to encourage. "There's a lady in my circle who teaches watercolor," she told Zara over breakfast their third day together. "Quite accomplished, has exhibited in San Francisco and even New York. I've arranged for you to meet her next week." Knox, true to his word, prepared to continue his journey to San Francisco. The morning of his departure, he and Zara walked in Margaret's garden, making plans for the future that now seemed possible for them. 2 months, he said, taking her hands in his. "I'll settle my uncle's estate, arrange my affairs, and return. Will you be here waiting?" "With a portfolio of paintings to show you," Zara promised. "And perhaps a plan for how two people who love freedom might build a life together without either feeling trapped." His smile was radiant. I'd like that very much." He drew her close, kissing her with a tenderness that held both farewell and promise. "Choose your own path, Zara Reynolds. I'll find you wherever it leads." As Knox rode away, Zara felt not loss but anticipation, the sweet certainty that their story was not ending but merely pausing before its next chapter. In the space of a week, she had journeyed from captivity to freedom, from arranged marriage to chosen love. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with the strength Knox had helped her recognize in herself, and with the knowledge that true love enhanced rather than diminished her independence. 2 months later, when a familiar figure appeared at Margaret's gate, Zara ran to meet him without hesitation. Knox lifted her in a joyful embrace, his kiss speaking of all the longing their separation had created. That evening, under a sky filled with stars, he knelt before her in Margaret's garden and offered not a ring but a deed, the title to a small property outside Sacramento with a view of the mountains they had traversed together. "Room to breathe," he said simply. "Room to paint. Room to build whatever life we choose together." Zara's answer was never in doubt. With tears of joy blurring her vision, she accepted both the deed and the proposal it represented. "Yes," she whispered, "always yes." Their wedding, held in Margaret's garden a month later, was small but joyful. Zara wore her mother's locket and carried wildflowers, symbols of the freedom and natural beauty that had drawn her to Knox from the beginning. As they exchanged vows beneath an arbor twined with roses, Zara looked into the eyes of the man who had stepped between her and disaster that day in the mercantile store, and felt a gratitude beyond words for his courage in declaring that she deserved to choose love. And choose it she had not from desperation or obligation, but from the deepest certainty of her heart. In Knox Sutton, she had found not a master but a partner, not a controller but a champion, not a stranger but a soul whose journey was meant to intertwine with hers. As Knox slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, Zara knew with unshakable certainty that she had made the right choice, the only choice that could have led to true happiness. Not a forced marriage to a man who saw her as property, but a union freely entered with a man who saw her as she truly was and loved her for it. "I choose you," she whispered as he bent to seal their vows with a kiss. "Today and always, I choose you." In the years that followed, their home became known for both its beauty and its warmth. Zara's watercolors, capturing the wild landscapes of California with breathtaking skill, eventually gained recognition beyond Sacramento, exhibited in galleries as far away as San Francisco and even Chicago. Knox, his wandering days behind him, found satisfaction in raising horses and occasionally guiding travelers through the mountain passes he had come to know so well. Their children, first a son with Knox's storm-gray eyes, then twin daughters with Zara's artistic temperament, grew up surrounded by love and the absolute certainty that they would be free to choose their own paths when the time came. And on summer evenings, when the setting sun painted the distant mountains in shades of gold and crimson, Knox and Zara would sit on their porch, hands intertwined, and marvel at the journey that had brought them together, a journey that began with a woman's courage to reject a life imposed upon her, and a man's conviction that she deserved the freedom to choose love.